Hello, my dear friends. Welcome to Led to Gold. This is the podcast devoted to discussing all things growth and wellness, and I am so happy you're here. Today, if you're listening on the day of this episode's release, is a big, special, magical day. It is the Aries solar eclipse, and I will be, by the time this is posted, up in Burlington, Vermont, watching it with my partner and a dear friend, and I'm super excited. Wherever you are in the world, even if you're listening to this well after the eclipse, I hope that some of that great, wide open, changing energy finds you and finds you in a position where you could use it. And I think today's episode is going to reflect a lot of that same energy. So we'll get into all the nerdy astrology stuff later, but we're talking about change. We're talking about the big, scary events that kind of shift our course in life. And there's a lot of directions that we could take with this, but I'll try to keep it somewhat streamlined. And before I do that, I will give my usual spiel. Led to Gold is both a podcast and a blog. So if you enjoy this, if this is not your first time listening and you're like, I kind of like these conversations, maybe I want a little bit more. Maybe you want a little bit more in the form of writing. You can check out ledtogold.com. The link for that is in the show notes below. And I post a podcast every other Monday. I post a blog every adjacent Monday. Except for this past Monday, because it has been crazy out here, which we will also get into later. But nonetheless, pretty much every single Monday, you can expect something from me. And I would love if you would go check that out if you're enjoying. And if you are enjoying and you haven't already done so, please feel free to rate the podcast wherever you're listening. You can subscribe to Led to Gold for free. I send little cute newsletters once a month-ish, including exclusive Spotify playlists that are private to you and my other subscribers. So if you're into that, get on it. That's that. Follow me on Instagram if you want to keep up to date. And the last thing I'll say is the one thing, if you would like to throw a little money my way, I do have some merch over at TeePublic. So all of the links are in the show notes. Anything and everything you choose to do or not do is much appreciated. I'm just glad you're here. So thanks. All right. For today, talking about change, surrendering to change. What does that mean? What does that look like? As I say that, does that scare you a little bit? Because I know if I were younger me listening to this 5, 6, 7 years ago, terrified. Absolutely not. Change? No, thank you. Don't know her. Don't want to know her. And that is where I'm going to start off with this whole conversation for today. Just a little bit of like background and story time on where this lands for me personally and why we're talking about this. I'll preface by saying, and I think it probably goes a little bit without saying, I too was once very resistant to change. Very, very resistant to change. But I would like to think I am a normal amount of resistant to change now. It no longer scares me. Maybe it doesn't always excite me. Maybe there are some scary, daunting life things that I know are coming down the road, but I would like to think that we have a handle on that way too big of a fear now, if that makes sense. So let's talk about that a little bit, because where this is coming from for me is a story that I have only very recently begun to let go of as a part of who I am. I am a person who does not like change. That's what I would have said maybe even a year ago. Like, I do not like change. It's scary. I hate it. I just want things to stay the way they are. Now, it's funny because I'm like, I say that out loud and I'm almost laughing at myself because I'm like, wow, I just don't feel that way anymore. But let me take you on a little field trip back to high school for me. Let's say 2014, 2015, somewhere in there. You might laugh at me for saying this. I loved high school. I know that sounds really lame, but it's true. I loved high school, especially as I was getting more into like my junior and senior year. I felt like my class in particular was really special because most people knew everybody. Like we all kind of just knew of each other. We weren't all friends, but everybody was like cool with each other. And it was really cool, I think, because I remember going to parties and things in high school where like pretty much everyone was invited. It wasn't exclusive. It was just kind of like, hey, drop by if you want. So you'd go to a party and there'd be like the stereotypical cool kids. And then there'd be like the theater kids and the band kids and the jocks and like everybody, you know, it's like all the stereotypes. I kind of think of it like Dazed and Confused. If you've ever seen that movie, that is a pretty close description comparison to my high school experience. So it was like chill. It was fun. Had a great time. I had the same partner that I have now. Things were great with that. Just like doing fun things, loving life, doing my thing. And I remember in the middle of like junior and senior year, thinking to myself, like, I actually truly never want this to end. And without getting way too into the details of my life back then, I remember my partner and I talking about maybe taking a little break once we started college because we just wanted to make sure that it was going to work out between the two of us, that we were actually right for each other, which in hindsight, I don't regret. But I remember thinking once high school is over, that part of my life is also over. And what's next? I kind of just want to get it over with. So because I had such a strong mindset of I love where I'm at right now, and I don't really have any feelings or thoughts or excitements towards college other than, you know, maybe like living on my own for the first time. I wasn't excited to meet new people. I wasn't excited to go to a new school or do different classes, none of it. I just kind of like wanted it over. So I really do think I set myself up pretty horribly for college because I was very resistant to enjoying my time there. I just wanted it over. And that really, really stuck with me because guess what? I wasn't really trying to make new friends in my first, second semesters of college. So it took me a lot longer to make friends. It took me even longer than that to feel like they were true, genuine friends. And in all honesty, I don't have a lot of lasting friendships from my college. I found them elsewhere, but like the place where I went to college, I didn't bring a lot of people with me out of that experience. So that's one example of that. Another one would be kind of in the midst of all of that. I, in high school, thought of myself as just like the happy-go-lucky girl. Friends would tell me that I was their friend that had her shit together. And I was just like chilling out, having fun, go with the flow, good vibes only, no worries, anytime ever. But very quickly in college, that was not the case at all. At all. I was miserable, horrifically miserable. But I didn't know that I had any other choice but to be that happy girl, right? So that was the face that I put on everywhere I went as much as I possibly could. Either that or I would just isolate so nobody had to know that I was secretly miserable. And I've definitely talked about this on the show before, but just for the purposes of like the pattern that this brought me on, it quickly got so bad that I think maybe it was that December or January, right around my first or second semester, somewhere in there. I was so all over the place and so unwell mentally that I succumbed, I guess, to going to see a counselor and being like, what the fuck is wrong with me? Why am I feeling like this? Why am I so miserable? Why am I not happy? Like I'm supposed to be happy. And I say succumb, by the way, because at that time, that is truly how I felt about it. It was not the place for me. I was not the kind of person that needed to go to therapy or to seek a counselor, but I truly did not know what else to do. I was desperate. I was just like, I just cannot continue to feel like this. And that was my first indication, I guess, that no, I really wasn't. I was actually not okay at all. Very anxious, very sad. And I just did not know what to do with that. I think another piece of why that was so tricky for me was just because I didn't grow up really in a household that understood mental illness or talked about it at all. So I had no language for it whatsoever, but it was just very confusing and very isolating. But I kind of isolated myself in a way too. So all of that to say, because I was so stuck in the belief that I had to be good and happy and go with the flow and chill and whatever, because I had to be that person, I resisted ever doing real therapy or getting on medication that I really needed for years. That little intervention was in 2015, maybe early 2016, and I didn't start an SSRI until mid 2019. So I was living with that for a very, very long time, and way longer than I needed to be. I know we all have our thoughts on medication. That is what works for me and has worked for me and continues to work for me. So in any case, something that I could have used long before I finally got around to doing it. And the mental hurdles that I had to go through to finally break that belief of like, you don't need medication. You're too happy for that. You're a happy person at heart. Not for you. Like, huge. And we can get into that too. But again, another pattern of just like, I cannot let this part of myself change. I'll give you one more. And the light at the end of the tunnel with this one is that this was many years down the road. So finally, as this was occurring, I was actually more conscious of it, and I was able to recognize, oh, maybe this is something that I can allow to change, and I can allow that to be a good experience in my life. I was living with my partner, same partner through all of this. And this was in 2019 also, I believe, or maybe 2020. Yeah, 2020. But I was living with him and his 4 other guy roommates. 2 of those guys were also some of my best friends, and we just had so much fun in that house. Like, it was just an experience. The best theme parties, the best get-togethers, like just chilling in the living room, playing games, watching movies. Just, I can't explain because I feel like it sounds pretty normal, but you know the vibes when the vibes are there. The vibes were immaculate. And it was such an incredible living space. I was never bored. I always had somebody to talk to or something to do, walks to go on, whatever. So I remember moving from that part of my life into the part of my life where, oh, you know, things are really serious between me and my partner. We're graduating college. Maybe now is the time to move in together. I remember being so scared. Maybe not scared. I don't know if that's the right word, but just what if I can't handle just living with one other person? Like, I really like this roommate situation. I really like having like multiple people to hang out with and go to. So what if this doesn't work for me? I was really nervous about it. But as I mentioned, this was around the time that I was kind of finally starting to like embrace change a little bit. And I was able to not let that belief that, oh, I'm a person who does well with roommates. That was not so ingrained in me that I couldn't allow this beautiful and meaningful and expansive change to happen. Because it did happen, and it's been literally perfect. Maybe not, but like mostly perfect. So putting all of those experiences together, I hope that kind of paints a picture of what I'm trying to get at here, which is that change happens to all of us all the time. And maybe you are the kind of person who it has never really been resistant to change. Maybe you've always understood it to kind of be this constantly flowing current in your life. And if so, honestly, I envy you, because that may have been the longest and hardest lesson for me to learn in my young life. Surrendering to change and just allowing myself to float in that current was so hard, like so hard. And I think I've made that clear. But if you are like me and maybe change is quite daunting and scary to you, and you do find yourself resisting, there's so many places I could go with this, because this is just such a huge theme, or it has been such a huge theme in my life. But I do want to talk about why change tends to be so scary for so many of us. And to some degree, I think the answer to that is a little bit obvious. Namely, we can't always know if the future is going to be a net positive. We don't know what's coming. We don't know how things are going to play out. And of course, that is a very normal human fear. Maybe it's not as severe as fear, but that is a very common human feeling, to be curious and maybe a little bit anxious about the future. What does it hold? We don't know. And not knowing is universally scary. Maybe we know that there is a pretty big change up on the horizon for us. Maybe it's getting out of a relationship, or moving across the country, or starting a new job. Like, there's so many, obviously, things that could feel like a big daunting change. There's really no way to know if it's going to be quote unquote for the better, unless it is something that completely lights you up and you have a really great intuitive feeling about it. Of course, you are going to be a little bit more likely to embrace that change. But for a lot of these things, we just don't have an answer. It's a mystery, and mystery is scary. But I think something that we do as humans, especially living today, that we get in our own way about this, is that we resist it. We resist change. And that makes it a lot scarier than it needs to be. Because think about it like this. I just use that little current analogy. If you're floating along with the current of change, you're not really working that hard to stay afloat. Imagine it's just like a nice, smooth river, right? Maybe you're on a raft or something. But if you've ever been on a raft or a tube or a kayak or something in a river, and then you try to hold on to a rock, or you try to hold on to grass underneath the current, that's really hard. And that's what it essentially is when we resist the inevitable. We resist the current, right? We have to stay there and hold on to something and grip onto something for a long time. And maybe the current's going pretty fast. It's not easy to do. It also, you could think of it like swimming against that current. Not easy, right? You're going to have to work a lot harder than if you would just surrender and float down. So thinking of it like that, in hindsight, makes me look back on a lot of those memories that I shared with you, being like, oh man, like no wonder I was feeling so rough during all of that, because I was trying so hard to hold on to something that didn't want to be a part of my life anymore, that just was not fitting with my life anymore. I was growing. I was quite literally still growing and changing and becoming an adult. And that stuff just doesn't serve you forever. And I really feel like if my 17-year-old self could listen to this, I said this earlier, she'd be freaking out. She'd be like, no, we have to hold on to the happy girl that we know we are. Girl, it's okay. So I also want to say this too, that if you are getting a little bit like, ugh, about this conversation, you feel yourself like tensing and gripping, then I hope that this is the conversation for you. Because if you just let go, what would that feel like? And I know it's scary. I've been there recently too. Like, it is always, I think, going to be a freaky feeling to try to surrender. Surrender's not easy. It's really not. It's a trust fall. It's like all of these analogies that I'm bringing up. But here is a potential trick to maybe look into this in your own life and see if maybe you can find some patterns here, some things where you have inevitably changed and maybe not even known or realized. So I want you to try something. If you have a journal or you keep a journal, you've had one maybe for a couple of years now, go back in that journal to 6 months ago. So if you're listening to this when this comes out, that would be October 2023, right? 6 months ago, whatever it is. Go back to a page right around that time and just see what was on your mind. Reread a few of those pages. I guarantee that something in those pages that you were talking about, worrying about, stressing about, no longer applies to your life. I hope that's the case. That 6 months ago you was super pent up about, super stressed about, didn't see a way out of the situation, but now it's over. In the current day, it is no longer an issue. That right there is change. The fact that something has been resolved shows a little bit of change. And that little bit of change, I'd like to think, if you spend a little bit more time looking throughout the archives of your life, through journaling and whatever it is, you'll start to notice how those little tiny changes, those things that kind of show up for a while and then they dip away, they die away, they're no longer issues, they compound into greater personal changes, greater life changes. And through the actual physical changes in your life, you do start to kind of morph into a different new person, which maybe in its own right is a little bit scary, but also completely inevitable. And another thing that I want to talk about with this too is that obviously not all change is good change. It doesn't always feel good. I hesitate to say that all change is eventually going to be good, right? I think that's a little bit maybe too optimistic. But even in the lessons that I had to learn the hard way, i.e. waiting 4 or 5 years before I started an SSRI when I really could have used them a lot sooner and maybe spared myself several years of pain and anguish and like mental unwellness. Even though that was a hard, really like crash and burn kind of change, it taught me to be able to sit with the pain. And I'm really grateful for that. I'm really, really grateful for that, because who I was when I was 17, maybe she had a little inkling here and there of what anxiety felt like, but she did not have the capacity to sit with pain. And 27-year-old me, that feels weird. I just turned 27. 27-year-old me can sit with pain. 27-year-old me knows what it is like to work through grief and feel insane. Like, these are things that I have now experienced that had I constantly and consistently fought to cling on to the happy girl, I would still 10 years later be completely stifled. I would be hiding an entire huge portion of my true self away from everybody who knows me and every person who encounters me. An entire version of myself would not ever see the light of day because I would not allow it. So much so that I probably wouldn't even know that it is a part of me until something so catastrophic and so painful happens that I just have no choice but to become that. And in that state, it's not an empowered pain. It is an unfathomable pain. It is something that old version of me, that happy girl version of me, did not have the capacity for. And she would not have been able to handle it or withstand it or sit with it, not even for a minute. And that would not be good, right? So, all in all, it's a good thing that I had to learn the hard way. It's a good thing that this change happened, even though it was painful. So all of that to say, see if in this practice, as you go back through your memories and journal entries, however it works for you, whatever gives you that sort of archive of who you were and what worries you had, what changes you were afraid of, see what has changed. Because there is definite change happening, even if it's in a really subtle undercurrent. Maybe if you're not seeing it 6 months ago, try a year. Go back a year. Go back 2 years. Go back 5 years if you have that much journal to go through. Or honestly, even this could work with like pictures, you know? For me anyway, I'll go back to old pictures from like senior year of high school, early college, all of these times that I've been mentioning. And I'm like, man, I was living such a different life back then. It's crazy. So if you can practice that in some way, I would encourage you to maybe even pause this for a minute and just kind of reminisce. What was at the forefront of your mind back then? And where did that end up? Has it been resolved? I hope so. How have things evolved? And another thing that might be interesting to look at in this conversation is that maybe all of that change hasn't been for the better. Surely it hasn't all been for the better, because that's not how life works all the time. Maybe you look back on those pictures or on those journal entries and you're like, man, I wish that I was still feeling that way. Maybe things have gotten net worse. If that's the case, I just want you to first know that I am with you, and I know that feeling because that was me in the midst of my horrendous college mental health, looking back on pictures from high school and being like, I just wish I could be her again. I just wish I could have that life again and be in that place again. So know first that I'm with you, and a lot of people are with you. And perhaps, I hope that these stories and this conversation could maybe serve as a little glimmer of hope that even from that place, things will still change, and maybe it's possible to just see where that change leads. Like, can you write it out? Can you see if it will lead you to something that you never would have even imagined was possible? Never in a million years. Because it is possible that something way out there could be in store for you, and you would never know right now. Hang in there, friend, because truly, truly, nobody knows where this current is going. And I think that this could potentially be a confirmation that change is coming. No matter what, it is always coming. It's here right now. So maybe you can get ahead of it a little bit. Maybe you can make some controlling changes on your own behalf and just see where it takes you. And I do believe, I would like to think we're in a really good time to be able to imagine what this could look like. We're in a good position to be able to dream about what's to come and try to plan it out in a way. Maybe not plan, maybe plan isn't the right word, but at least to just kind of imagine and wonder about what our potential future could hold. Good, bad, everything in between. And here's where I'm going to get a little bit astrology nerdy, as I promised I would, because there are two huge things happening right now. In fact, today, when this episode comes out, is, as per mentioned, the Aries solar eclipse. And I am no astrologer. I don't know a lot about the specifics. If you want to know more about the specifics, I have some recommendations in the show notes for you to listen to, read, whatever strikes your fancy. But the eclipse in general is known for casting light onto some dark and hidden things. So whatever has kind of been working under the surface in our lives is said to be a little bit more obvious at this point in time. So it could be possible that around today, you're starting to notice patterns and just like things going on in your life that you never really noticed before. Maybe that's good, maybe that's not so good. But the Aries eclipse in particular, Aries is known for being bold and like kind of violent and kind of just like in your face. So having that there may potentially make these things a little bit more obvious. And accompanying the solar eclipse in Aries today, we also have a season of Mercury in retrograde. And I know there are a bajillion memes out there about Mercury in retrograde, but the general gist of it is that, again, we're going to have to like kind of sift through things that are not working. So a lot of people complain about technology going wonky and just like plans getting flaked on and things just going wrong, right? That's what Mercury in retrograde is stereotypically known for. But further than that, it's also an opportunity for you to look at parts of your life that are not working. Like, where are things going wrong? Where have things routinely been going wrong? And what can I do to course correct? So again, because this is happening all in Aries season, Aries is in your face. Apparently, this is supposed to be a pretty loud, pretty obvious wake-up call for all of these weird, wonky changes or things that should be tweaked or changed. So there you go. I mean, what better time than to kind of ponder these things? If surrendering to really big change is scary for you, if surrendering to any change is scary for you, as it has been for me for so long, right now, if you are somebody who maybe wants to dabble in astrology a little bit, right now is a good time to face that fear and be brave and just let it run its course. Let the current take you where it wants to go. Because I would like to believe that we can't really be led astray in this undercurrent of change. Change is inevitable. It is all around us. It is happening all the time. You just have to look for it. And I believe in trying to make friends with it, trying to notice it more often. And in this little astrological crazy season that we have going on, it's not really even something that needs to be looked for. It's going to be in your face. It's going to be loud. It's going to be perhaps obnoxious, and you're going to wish that it would just like settle down for a little bit, maybe. This is a good time to intentionally make friends with change and just see where that takes you. So, all in all, change might not always be good. It might feel bad most of the time if you're anything like me, but it is something that we can change our relationship with. We can change our relationship to change. How cool is that? And maybe that has been the roadblock that is getting in your way of like reaching what is truly going to make you feel good about your life. Maybe not. But if this conversation was at all helpful, I hope it was, share it with a friend who might be needing to hear it. If you have any thoughts or comments or suggestions or questions, DM me on Instagram. I always love hearing from you guys, and I would love to continue this conversation as I would with any of them. And I would just love to hear from you in general. So if you're still here, thanks for sticking around, and we will finish up today's episode with a little game of We're Not Really Strangers. And if this is your first time listening, I do this at the end of every single episode. If you still have your journal out, now might be a good time to get a pencil as well and just see what comes to mind. But we'll kind of answer this together. So here we go. Here is today's question. Ooh, okay. This isn't a question. It's a reminder. I will give you a question after this, but I do like this, especially for today's topic. So here's your reminder. If you're trying not to think about it, it's probably time to heal it. Just something to think about. Okay, here's our real question. It's a new one. I've never gotten this one before. What promise do you want to keep to yourself this year? Write it out and date it. Okay, so here would be a really awesome journaling prompt, especially if you were listening to this on the day of the solar eclipse. Huge thing we could do. So what is a promise you want to keep to yourself this year? Mine is that I want to practice radical love as much as I possibly can. So what that means for me is just like at all times, maybe not all times, because that's a little bit unrealistic, but as much as I possibly can, I want to think of what the most loving version of myself would do in a situation, the most open-hearted version of myself. So when I'm getting annoyed at a student at work, or when I'm hangry, or traffic is bad and I'm anxious and I'm trying to park in DC and I just get freaked out because that happens every time I try to park in DC. What would the most loving, open-hearted version of myself do? And I would like to think 99% of the time the answer is I would relax a little bit, maybe like roll my shoulders back and just breathe and be okay with the situation. And if it's a situation in which I do need to be a little bit more vocal, confident, like sticking up for myself, sticking up for somebody else, I can do it with love rather than with reactivity and like malice. Because I am an Aries after all. Sometimes I get a little heated. Sometimes I get a little petty. So trying to steer away from that and more just into like the open-heartedness that I know that I do have. But I'm trying to build a little bit more space and intention around that. So that is the promise to myself. I'm going to do better about being the most loving version of me. What about you? What's a promise you want to keep to yourself this year? If you are listening on the solar eclipse, just let it be known this is a super extra special promise to yourself. This is a big deal. So I hope you treat it as such. Again, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this one. I am so happy to have this little community, and I will see you back here in another 2 weeks or on the blog next Monday if you so choose to check that out. So thanks, and I love you, and we will talk soon. Bye-bye.